Hello, I want to talk to you about the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was very different from the presidents who came before him. For one, he wasn't a political insider. Remember that Thomas Jefferson was the vice president of John Adams. John Adams, of course, was the vice president of George Washington. And Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State was James Madison, who's going to be the next president of the United States after Jefferson. And Madison's Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense at the same time was James Monroe. And James Monroe's Secretary of State was John Quincy Adams. And so we had a long string of political insiders who became our president. Andrew Jackson is going to come in, and he's going to be more of a populist sort of president, what we would now call a populist. All right, in that he's going to parlay his military experience into a presidential bid, and successful presidential bid actually in 1824. All right, so what's going to happen here is that Andrew Jackson was already well known across the country as an Indian fighter, and as someone who had fought the Spanish and the English. All right. For example, in the early 1800s, he invaded Florida to go after some Indian tribes that were causing problems in Georgia, that were raiding some of the areas there. And by the time it was all over, he not only subjugated the Indians that were there, or at least most of them, all right, but he had also pushed the Spanish out of Florida, and so the United States was able to purchase Florida for a really cheap bargain price, much probably for about a little bit less than it probably cost to buy a couple acres, like a house on Miami Beach or something. All right, and then during the War of 1812, he's the general that is in charge of New Orleans, and during the Battle of New Orleans, the English are going to come in 1814, and Andrew Jackson is going to defend the port of New Orleans from the English, and he's going to be a real kind of considered a bona fide war hero from all of his efforts during those two campaigns, and he's going to use that popularity to begin a political career. All right, so he's an outsider. He is from the West, or of course, the West at that point was like West Georgia, but he is from the West, and all these others were political insiders from the East, and so he's going to be like our first president that actually runs as a Washington outsider. And so, in fact, that was one of his selling points. Anyway, so he's also going to run on a promise of universal suffrage or universal right to vote. Now, before we get too excited about him being, all that free and liberal and what have you, his definition of universal is a little different than maybe yours and my definition. His idea of universal suffrage is you had to be 21, white, and a male. But you didn't have to own land. For a very long time, in order to vote in this country, you had to prove that you owned land. And that goes back to English common law. Remember a couple weeks ago, where we talked about if you owned property in that, then you have certain rights that are tied to that property. Well, one of those is the right of suffrage, or the right to vote. And so he is in favor of doing away with the land rights, or with the land property, the property requirement for voting. And so this is going to increase the number of people in our country who can vote from about 12% to maybe 31% or so. And it's going to make him very popular. It's going to be seen as a real man of the people. And he's going to really embrace this popularity with the man of the people persona. And again, he's going to kind of use it to be sort of a bully pulpit, where he'll say that, for example, the House of Representatives is filled with men who are elected by their district, so they're elected by a few people, or the Senate is filled with people who are selected by people from one state. He is the president, and he is selected by people from all states. Therefore, he is the most important person in Washington. This is going to put him, he's going to annoy a lot of people, political insiders, because they didn't necessarily see political insiders as being all that bad. And so there's going to be a big change he's going to absolutely change the Democratic-Republican Party. In fact, he's going to just drop the Republican part, because Republican implies that other people are running government, and go and just embrace the Democrat part. He's not going to call himself a Democratic Republican. He's going to call himself just a Democrat. He's going to be our first Democrat. president. And he is also going to be the person who people said that he was stubborn as an old mule and that he could be a real ass sometimes. And so they started using the donkey as a symbol for the Democratic Party, his Democratic Party. All right. He was also really rough around the edges. He swore in public, and he once killed a man in a duel because that man insulted his wife, said his wife was ugly. So he wasn't necessarily defending his wife. He was saying, I am too good of a man to have an ugly wife. So they went out in the back alley, pulled pistols, and Jackson shot and killed the man for it. So he really was kind of an interesting fellow. As president, he expanded the role of the federal government. He really was, because he was so popular with the people. People were, representatives and senators were afraid to say anything bad against him because he was so popular with the people, that he really had a chance to shape national politics. And he did a couple things in his career, as that really helped our nation. For example, he did promote his brand of universal suffrage. And so there were more people able to vote. Now, this benefited him because many of those new voters, of course, voted for him and his Democratic Party. Other things that he did is he saves the Union. At one point, there's a secession crisis. South Carolina is angry because Congress passes a law called the Tariffs of Abominations, is what they called it, not Congress. And so what's going to happen is they're going to come in and say, well, you know what? States have sovereignty. We are our own state. The national government is there to support the states. States' rights, we're just going to ignore the law. We're just going to nullify that law. Is what it's going to say. We're going to cancel that law out. That law will not apply in South Carolina. And so Jackson sends a nice invitation to Mr. Calhoun, the senator from South Carolina. He says, "Okay, come on over for dinner. Let's have a chat." And basically tells him in no uncertain terms that I am the president. I represent the entire America, including South Carolina. You will follow the law. To which Calhoun says, fine, I'm going home, and we're just going to withdraw from this federal union you love so much, and we'll form our own country. Then you will not have any authority over us. And so we kind of have like the beginnings of what could be a civil war over taxes. And so Jackson's like, I'm not going to let you tear my country apart over this. And so he sends the United States military down. He sends the army down to occupy Charleston, South Carolina, and make sure that they don't get any ideas about tearing our country apart and making two countries out of it. Now, I do find it interesting that many people from South Carolina look at Jackson as a hero because he saved the Union, and look at Lincoln, some 40 years later, who's going to do something very similar to that, as a real villain for doing the exact same thing that Jackson did. Politics are fickle. All right. But at the same time, Jackson also made some very controversial things. Jackson was an absolute racist. He didn't even hide it. He was even much more outspoken about the inferiority of the races, meaning not white. He was even more outspoken than Jefferson. Jefferson only believed that people of African descent were inferior in intellect and culture and what have you. Jackson believed everybody was, except for the white Anglo-Saxon man. And so he would say things like the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And many of his policies were expanded slavery. And many of his policies also were very detrimental to American Indians. All right, let's talk first about one policy he had dealing with what's called a national bank. Alexander Hamilton had set up a national bank some 20 years earlier. And so he is, but it's coming up time to renew that charter. Well, Jackson thinks that national government should be kind of small, and he doesn't like the idea of having a national bank, a bank that will regulate currency, issue currency. And his idea is instead that local banks should be able to issue their own currency, establish their own rules for making loans or for paying interest or not paying interest, who they loan to, who they don't. And so he wants to decentralize the banking system away from this one central bank that has huge amounts of economic power. And so he decides he's going to kill the national bank. Problem is that Congress likes the national bank because it helps to keep order and helps to promote policies, monetary policy, that ensure growth in our country. So Jackson comes in and says, fine, you can vote to have your national bank, but I am the president, and he withdraws all of America's money from the national bank. So now the bank has no money, and a bank without money is not a bank. And so the national bank fails. Well, this results in a nationwide depression that they call the hard times. And it gets so bad that people are minting their own pennies. They call it hard time tokens. And they're trading those instead of American money because there's no American bank to control the money, the currency. But Jackson is able to spin this so that it looks like the guys in Congress are at fault. If they didn't have a national bank, we wouldn't have had to do this. I did this for the benefit of the people to decentralize. Now your bank is closer to you, and you can go and bank and be happy, and yay, power to the people. Democracy in action right there. All right. Now, he had no way of knowing that that policy is actually going to be the cause, or one of the causes, major causes, a little over 100 years later, of the Great Depression. In 1929, 100 years after Jackson made this decision, there's going to be an economic crisis on Wall Street, and the decentralized, deregulated banks that are setting their own rules are all going to collapse and push our country into the greatest economic crisis of our history. And that economic crisis is going to spread from outside the United States all the way to Europe and allow leaders like Adolf Hitler to take power because of the economic weakness of Germany at the time. Now, again, he had no way of knowing this, but it does not change the fact that some of his decisions are going to have long-standing results. And I think that sometimes we forget that really the true measure of a president shouldn't be what do they do while they're president, but what happened because of what they did as their president 20 years after they're out of office. I know myself personally, I look at the presidents that I wasn't necessarily impressed with when they were presidents, and now I look at it and go, well, you know what, maybe that person wasn't so bad. It turned out okay. Another thing that he's going to do that's going to have long-term effects even today is his policy towards American Indians. He's going to promote Indian removal, and he's going to promote it very firmly. All right. So here's what the Indian Removal Act does. Indian Removal Act is a law that Congress has passed that says that if you're an American Indian, you're going to give up your land, and we're going to trade you land west of the Mississippi in unempty land like Oklahoma. All right, which wasn't really empty, but it was empty enough for the American government, and so they were happy to give it to the Indians so they could have all that land in Florida. Problem, and Georgia and some of these other places. The problem was that the Indians didn't have a choice. You know, you come talk to me and says, hey, listen, I want your house, I want your land. I'm going to trade you land in, say, Nebraska or somewhere pretty. I may go, I'm going to think about this, and I'll talk it over with my wife and children, and we'll come to a decision. All right. Instead, what's going to happen is they're going to come in and say, hey, we're buying your land and trading you land in Oklahoma, and you don't get a say in the matter. And if you do, then we're just going to send the army in, and they're going to push you out with bayonets, and you're going to walk from Florida and Georgia all the way to Oklahoma, and about a fourth of you aren't going to make it. It's going to be called the Trail of Tears because so many people died along the way. Well, one group that's really not going to like this are the Cherokee. The Cherokee in Georgia, they were content to kind of leave it alone for a while. But they had some good relationships with the Cherokee. They sent missionaries over there. In fact, most Cherokee were Christian. By the time Jackson becomes president, there was a lot of intermarriage between the Cherokee and the other people from Georgia, the American citizens. And so, in fact, the head of the Cherokee Nation was a guy by the name of John Ridge. Not a very, not a very good Indian name, is it? Right. John Ridge and his father was from Scotland. He was a Scottish immigrant, and he owned a store. Many of the Cherokee owned plantations with slaves, and they raised cotton for export. In fact, they were selling their cotton right next to other people from Georgia's cotton in Virginia, and putting it on the same boats and charging the same price, and all these different things. In fact, if you walked onto Cherokee lands, you may not notice that you were on Cherokee lands. The people there were, because of so much intermarriage with the whites, they were a lot lighter skinned than what we sometimes think of American Indians. And so they really felt like they were very, very civilized. Well, one of the things so when Indian removal comes in, they go, we don't like this so much, so you know what we're going to do? We're going to fight this. And they're going to fight this in one of the most American ways possible. They're going to hire a lobbyist. A guy by the name, they called him Ravenhair. All right, but his name in history is more commonly known as Mr. Sam Houston. You see, Sam Houston and Andrew Jackson hated each other. I mean, it was a true honest-to-goodness hatred. All right, Sam Houston was the governor of Tennessee, and Andrew Jackson supported the political outsider and got Houston voted out of office. So he lost that election. So he takes up a job. His wife was Cherokee, so he takes a job working for the Cherokee as a lobbyist. Goes to Washington. Hey, listen, you know what? The Cherokee, they're just like us. You know what? Come on, let's let them keep their land, and let's, because in a few years they're going to be us, and there's no reason to make things ugly or for people to be hurt, families to be broken up. Let's not do that. And a lot of people in Congress are going to agree with Jackson. It says, you know what, the Cherokee are sufficiently civilized that we really shouldn't necessarily try to do anything with them. Jackson is going to disagree. Jackson's going to push very hard. He's going to remind everybody of how much Sam Houston liked to drink, and Sam Houston was an alcoholic. And so it becomes a very personal fight, and Sam Houston is actually going to become so enraged at Andrew Jackson that he's going to finally leave and go out of the country. And he's going to go to Mexico and settle in the northern province of Texas, where he's going to get involved in politics there. And but anyway, so he was, and we'll talk about that some other time. So Sam Houston, and by the way, another politician that he was from Tennessee that got on the wrong side of Jackson over Indian rights was a guy by the name of Davy Crockett. David Crockett was believed that the Cherokee, and at least the ones in the Tennessee area, should be allowed to stay on their lands and shouldn't be forced off their lands if they don't want to. So Jackson proceeded to try to destroy Representative Crockett, and Crockett finally got so mad at it that on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, he told everybody, you can go to hell and I shall go to Texas. And then proceeded to go to Texas, where unfortunately his first stop was the Alamo, and there was no second stop for him because he was killed at the Alamo. But I guess it all turns out okay because there's lots of schools named after him. So if you get the point that Jackson made a lot of political enemies, you're right, he did. Anyway, so going back to the Cherokee. So the Cherokee come along, and things aren't going so well, so they decide they're going to do something else that's very American. They're going to sue Andrew Jackson. They're actually going to sue the state of Georgia, because Georgia's going to come in and say, we're going to take this land from you, and we're going to make it part of our state. And, the land was fertile, there were already plantations there, and they also discovered gold. And before, they were willing to, let's see how this is all going to work out. Now, with the presence of gold, they were like, we're going to claim this territory before Tennessee claims it, and so they're going to come in and they're going to take it. And the Cherokee are going to go, no, you're not, we're going to sue you. And so they take them to court. It gets all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where the United States Supreme Court is going to come in and say, you know what, Cherokee Nation, you're right. You deserve to stay on your land. You're not some uncivilized barbarian. You are an independent nation, and you should be treated as an independent nation and not be forced off your land if you don't want to be. And then Jackson, when he heard this, he said, well, George Marshall, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, said, well, okay, that's fine. The Supreme Court has made their decision, but let's see if they could enforce it. At which point he orders the military to go in and forcibly remove the Cherokee from their lands. So we see a president who was willing to use force to expand his power and the power of the federal government. And this is going to be a changing, transformative moment in American politics. He was very controversial. He did things that the people loved. He did things, and many of the people still love the fact that he took the lands from the Cherokee. But he also did things that are going to have some long-term ramifications that are going to be with pushing the American Indians out of the East. It's going to give rise to new tensions in the West. It's going to give rise to and destabilize that region, which leads to new Native American groups becoming more aggressive and beginning to raid and do some things like that. We're also going to, I already mentioned the banks. And so he is definitely one of the more interesting presidents, which is why he gets a whole week dedicated to him. Until then, I'll talk to you later. I hope to see you in class, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.